Martinez, welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's an honor for me to have you on our podcast. We've been visiting with people that are all over the country, if not the world, in some instances, talking about our Farm Table podcast. You know, the idea of bringing people around the table, talking about farming, and of course, in your position, in our position, we have a unique connection in that which we'll get into, is that you have a family coffee farm, and you'll get into that in
Yes.
Guatemala. And of course, we use those beans in our single origin Guatemala. They're also a part of our house blend
Hmm.
that we do here at our Black Clover Country Coffee, which we roast right here on our farm. So I'm excited to connect with you on all of this formally.
Awesome. Likewise. Thank you for the opportunity to do this, and I've enjoyed learning more as well, just in hearing some of the prior podcasts, and really impressed with how deep you go in so many different places in terms of building community and relationships. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I appreciate you sharing all that. One of the things that we did when we kicked off our coffee roaster here on our farm was we wanted to connect with people that had, a shared vision and good ethics, and both with the folks and the people that are, growing the coffee beans, because most of them, right, come from within, 15 to 30 degrees of the equator. So a lot
Yeah.
of it, there's a lot of travel, to get from, in your case, Guatemala to the Seattle area. And one of the cool connections was you have a cousin, Deanne DeVries,
Yes.
that connected us, right? And she's in Seattle. We have gotten to know her family over the years, and both professionally and personally. And so we're just really grateful to be connected with you from that perspective as well.
Yeah, that's been a fun connection. She grew up in Brazil, and then she and her husband Dave were in Southern California, and I've been married for over 2 decades. But I remember visiting them right before, a few times before getting married, with a college roommate, and so I've really enjoyed kind of staying in touch over the years, and so she's kept up, and I think shared with some of the family too, and I've been able to connect with more family since, on my mom's side. Um, my mom's from California, and my dad's from Guatemala, where I grew up.
I love it.
And I'm
Well,
currently based in Bellingham, an hour and a half north of where Deanne is, in
yeah.
this area. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm so thankful that they connected us, because one of the things that was important to us was to have as much relationship, with the farms that are providing the raw resources that we roast, and obviously try to get into people's hands to have for their, their morning breakfast or whenever they want to enjoy coffee. And so this kind of fit that for sure. We had a chance to meet, I think, with some of your team up in Bellingham for a few minutes, and just really felt a strong connection with what you guys are doing. So, kind of jumping right into it. I mean, tell me about growing up in Guatemala and your family coffee farm, and kind of where it went from there.
Sure. So I was actually born in Southern California, about between Los Angeles and Palm Springs. I was born in Loma Linda because my parents wanted me to be born in the United States. So they were actually in Guatemala, and they came up just so that I could be born in the United States. And then, of course, then went back after a few months. So I don't have any memory of that. It's just, you see pictures and hear stories, sometimes from other people. And I grew up bilingual. My parents, when they met, my dad did not speak any English, and my mom did not speak any Spanish. Um, so it was actually Deanne's father, uh, and his older brother. They were both in Brazil, and my mom was on her way down to Brazil with her parents, my grandparents, who have long since passed away, and Guatemala was just a pit stop. And when my mom arrived in Brazil, she had to rely on her brothers. So this is Deanne's father to use his Portuguese to read my dad's letter in Spanish so my mom could understand what he was communicating.
Holy
Um,
cow.
Long story short, they obviously got married. I grew up in Guatemala, and the way the coffee farm came into the picture is that my dad's parents were living in northwest Guatemala in the highlands in an area that is known for coffee. People that work in coffee in Guatemala, in other parts of the country, and in Guatemala City and in export, um, there's, I would say, two regions. Every region has really, really great coffee. Guatemala is fortunate in that sense that the lowest quality coffee in Guatemala is some of the highest compared to the lowest quality of any other country in Central and South America and Latin America. And
Wow.
so the low bar is pretty high. And if any of you are in coffee, to give a point score to this, specialty coffee is defined by the Specialty Coffee Association as coffee that scores 80 points or higher. It's really hard to find coffee that's below 80 points in Guatemala, whereas you can find a lot that is below in most other countries. Um, and that's partly because the land is so steep and the lower elevations are coastal, and so they're not great for growing coffee. And so what's left is not only high elevation, but it's steep. So there's a higher cost of infrastructure. Um, it's just building and maintaining a road is an ongoing and massive project, almost anywhere in Guatemala. Even when you fly into Guatemala City, people are shocked the first time they fly in because you see all of these houses that are on the edge of cliffs. And then you think that must be a crazy unique exception. And then you look around closely and that's the entire capital of Guatemala City. It's nestled around, surrounded by all these cliffs. So you can't really get anywhere quick driving, even on the flatter roads in a dense area, because of this. And so when you get into more remote areas, the cost of infrastructure is high. So all this to say, my grandparents were in northwest Guatemala. The region is called Huehuetenango, and the farm is our farm, Finca Vista Hermosa, is in San Pedro Necta, and specifically in Agua Dulce, which means sweet water, San Pedro Necta, which is the community in the department of Huehuetenango. And that's similar to Washington State or
Got it.
California, a department or like a um, province as well. Um, and they lived in the city of Huehuetenango, which is the same name as the department. And the farm, which right now is about an hour and a half, if you're going quick on a motorcycle, it's about 2 to 3 hours drive from the city of Huehuetenango. Um, always felt a lot further away from me growing up. We can fly there from Guatemala City, or we can drive in about 5 to 7 hours. But it used to be a minimum of 7 plus another 3, so almost 10 hours one way.
Wow.
Um, Guatemala is not that big when you look on a map. Land-wise, it's the size roughly of Tennessee.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
and they say if you iron it out, it's bigger than Texas, because
Oh,
it's very, very steep. So my grandparents in Huehuetenango were planting churches and they were pastoring a church. And someone in the church said, "Hey, I know you grew up on a farm by the coast. Someday you may like and want to be on a farm again." And so they were convinced to um, purchase something that was essentially almost gifted to them. And they said, "There's no way we can pay for this." But my grandmother quickly found some work. And so my grandparents started sewing pants for 10-year-olds, like kids' pants, to sell at a local store. And that's how they paid for the farm initially, the first lot.
that's
So
amazing.
fast forwarding over the years, my parents have added a little bit to it. Um, And my grandmother has passed away, but my grandfather's 105. He just celebrated 105 last year. Sorry, last month in August. And it's challenging, Michael. It's for me being bilingual, multicultural, very interested in business. When I started bringing coffee from our farm up in check on suitcases, um, I quickly realized that's not scalable or a business. Um, and I learned very quickly how difficult it was for a small producer to get their coffee to market, meaning not selling it to someone that is local, but to get it a little bit closer to where there's more value. Um, and that's kind of how I got into it about 20 years ago, bringing it and sending samples to anyone that I could find an address to. And 20 years ago, that was a much smaller number of roasters that than exist today. Um, and the number of importers and options for buying raw coffee was also a lot less. Um, so it was a lot of firsts, a lot of risk, and really a lot of failure. The first year I committed to pay $1.65 a pound. This is about 20 years ago, because that's what we auctioned our coffee off to a buyer in Japan on an online auction. And a year and a half later, I sold it for 89 cents a pound to a roaster that I won't mention, uh, that's in the Pacific Northwest. And so that was a bad start. But the feedback I got was really good. And that's where I learned about just the volatility in the market, and the value of relationships and long-term contracts, and quickly saw that there were people that wanted to pay a fair price for something and have it consistently available over time. And that is life-changing for farmers if they can connect to that. So that was my motivator, like finding that and then helping others find that.
Wow, that's amazing. It really is. Let me say it this way, it doesn't happen very often when you can kind of connect literally at the ground level on, these farms that either have existed for a long time and have changed ownership, or they're new, or all of the developments, because again, a lot of the beans are grown in the developing world, right? So there's different infrastructure challenges. We in the West, or we'll call it, that culture, we just expect we should be able to, get our latte or our drip coffee, and we don't, there's no connection any longer
Mhm.
to what it takes to get it into that cup. And you have a very personal story there, and it's cool, it's powerful. Well, how did you end up in Bellingham of all places? You're born in the U.S., right? You grew up in Guatemala, and how did you end up in the old outpost up near the Canadian border?
That's a much faster answer. My my mom's parents retired here and they've long since passed away, but as they were getting older, my parents were spending some time close to them. And I went to a university in LA 1 year, didn't want to take more loans, so I came home, and home at the time was in Bellingham.
Oh, wow,
So since my parents were just visiting to be with my grandparents, they left after a year, and I have not left yet. Uh,
fantastic.
I got married. We have 3 kids, and have since convinced both my wife and my parents to move here. Um, so we're a lot more rooted here. But it was initially because my grandparents retired here.
That is a lot quicker answer. I love it. You told me, I think, in passing, as we've gotten to know each other over the past year plus, that your family farm has kind of expanded a little bit into, for lack of a better phrase, co-op concept, right? Where you're working with other farms in the surrounding area to also bring in that coffee into the US. Is that right?
More or less, yes.
Okay.
We haven't expanded our farm, but when I started bringing our coffee up, the farm name is what I started sole proprietorship in the US with the name Finca Vista Hermosa. And what I did soon after was bring coffee from other farms under our license, and then I helped other farms get their own license. because there's a limit to how much we can bring under our license. And it's an interesting like actually I think it's a fascinating role, and I enjoy sharing this with people. Um, and it happens a lot in agriculture, but we have a license to export what our land is capable of producing, which is different than what our land produced. Now, you might ask why, what's the difference in the nuance? Being an agricultural product, when we plant a seed, it's 7 years before we see fruit, a mature tree. And so it's not like corn or a lot of crops that you see a return pretty quick, within a year or two, or sometimes several times in a year. Um, and then given that we're vulnerable to and at the mercy of things that are out of our control and unpredictable, primarily the weather, um, but also politics, just the general market volatility. Um, this law allows for a farmer that maybe, let's say, like we don't get too much in Guatemala, but sometimes in Honduras, there can be a hurricane that will completely eliminate a lot of the harvest for not just coffee, but other agricultural products as well for a season. And if that's in a regional space, if you have a business and a contract to sell something and you did all the work and now you don't have anything to sell because of something that's out of your control, this law provides so that you can buy from a neighbor, which may even be on the other side of the country, um, and fulfill that contract. So we grew a little bit doing that, and we provided full traceability. And then we started working with helping other farmers get their own license. That was the next step. And so we did a lot of that. And that's really how we expanded, I would say, in kind of our phase two. Um, and then halfway through that, I realized it's confusing for a roaster to buy a coffee that is from farm A, but the invoice says farm B on the top. Um, and so that's where Onyx Coffee was born, the name being something that would be an umbrella for encompassing the relationships that we were nurturing and cultivating, that we had high traceability in communicating with roasters where it came from, but the invoice was something to be explained. And as we continued to grow, I thought, well, we should just have a proper name for a brand that's not the farm, that can kind of wrap this up. And so that's really where Onyx was born. And today we continue those models, but we're also doing community lots. And that's where we have, I think, the most opportunity for impact by having efficiency, and providing consistency. And and this is a very, very loaded statement, Michael, but I think one of the most impacting things in an industry that I think is largely broken, is predictability. So if you think of yourself anywhere in the supply chain, the more information you have about what your future looks like informs you to make better decisions. And so predictability is extremely important, in sustainability of the coffee supply chain. Um, and so that's where we can provide that in both directions, through models of building community lots, because we can scale a little bit more, and we can also be a more sustainable business partner. Um, and there's a little bit less of the direct connection of one specific farmer to one roaster. Um, but what it does is it actually eliminates a lot of risk, where if this roaster outgrows or goes out of business, or changes their business model, it can put the farmer at risk.
Mm.
And if this farmer has a bad year, it can put the roaster at risk in having a lower quality or quantity. And so this provides a little bit of insurance where we can manage and still add more value of consistency and quality, to roasters, while being a more stable partner to producers that can work collectively. Um, so that's covering kind of three different buckets on how we've grown into other communities and with other relationships, both directly and through co-ops and groups.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, just calling it the co-op is not doesn't quite cover it. It sounds like And there's a lot more intentionality, it sounds like, to what you're doing that benefits, the citizens, community, farmers, in the region where your family coffee farm is. I think that's amazing. Take me just a quick deeper dive into, I think it's Ella or Ella. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. My Spanish last was in high school. But we're, I think, working with some of those farms or some of those producers here at Black Clover Coffee, right? What we're doing. So tell me a little bit what makes that group of farms or specific farm unique.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually one of, I think, probably our exciting highlights here in the last couple of years. Um, Initially, so ella simply means she or her in Spanish. And we created the brand ella at Onyx with the goal to exclusively focus and support women producers. And initially started with 3 mid-sized farms. We mostly work with small to mid-sized farms. Um, and the goal was to be a more consistent partner and provide more access. Some of the small producer farms that we worked with that were owned and or operated by women, I think of, I thought maybe I had a jar right in front of me. We started importing honey 8 years ago, and that can be another tangent perhaps, but I think of one woman, Ana Maria Ortega, who she has actually since sold her farm as she's gotten older and not able to get around physically as much. Um, but she has expressed um, over the years um, how difficult it's been for her to have access to even the local marketplace as a woman and to be able to negotiate and just to run a business. Um, and and so she I remember negotiating with her because um, she had the experience of really being taken advantage of in terms of what price was paid for her coffee. And so she was negotiating, kind of, swinging the pendulum to really ask a lot more. And as I was negotiating, I felt bad, but I realized she was fighting to get something fair. Um, that's really all she was
That was her
wanting.
goal. Yeah.
That was her goal. She just wanted something fair. And and she and this is kind of a controversial statement, but she said to me, I remember vividly sitting inside of a, a new restaurant in the city of Huehuetenango, um, having lunch, and we were talking about the commitment for us to buy all of her production for the year. Um, and she said, Edwin, I really enjoy working with you. Um, I have sold coffee to everybody else in this town. Everyone. There isn't anyone I haven't sold coffee to. And everyone, every one of them is a thief. They've all stolen from me and taken advantage. I thought, okay, well, I must be next. It seems like I'm in line here. And so really, it was more of a statement of it's just been very hard to get something fair. And so some of my early experiences, and this is someone who has more resources as a I would say a mid-sized farm. Um, to then connect with some of the women that we work with that are small producers, the access that they have um, is generally more challenging for them to do the same. And so wanting to connect and realizing that a lot of times they're producing equal or better quality and more consistently, but getting a lower price. Um, so we've just been intentional to be good long-term partners and to not be a good spot solution. And so these relationships take a lot of time. And that's really the spirit of AIA. Um, and we started with having already worked with a lot of women producers with our local, what we would refer to as legacy relationships. So it wasn't something new, but to really build a brand, that was something new. And building a brand is another level of investment where we want to have a model where we can grow both our purchase and sale of something that's meeting a certain criteria. And so that's really where I was born. Um, and part of being able to build something is having consistency both of quality and of availability. Um, and so there is a model where we've we still have a high level of traceability, but we've focused on a profile of a blend. And that allows us to deliver consistency and manage and have quality that can iron out some of the ups and downs that might come with connecting just from the same lot or parcel to an individual roaster. Um, and that allows us to be a lot more predictable and provide value as a buying partner that we can say we will consistently grow, maintain and grow each year.
Well, and it sounds like you've kind of turned the tide on that particular woman's experience and maybe other, female producers or whatever that you've kind of, you know, made it to where they're not sharing that story anymore, that everybody in the town is a thief or they're taking advantage of you or whatever, because you've been able to buy responsibly and make sure that they, kind of get not only what they need, or as you said earlier, something fair at a
Mhm.
minimum and a commitment, a long-term relationship that they can count on, you can count on, and ultimately people in my, spot, as a roaster, can count on as well.
Yeah, and the last group that we started with a couple of years ago was actually an organized co-op or association, a little bit different than a co-op. And this is Mujeres Luchando por un Mejor Futuro, which means women fighting for a better future. And they were incredibly organized. They, I mean, they have it together. And when we connected with them, I knew because of their location that the potential for quality was high. And upon trying the coffee, seeing that their processing, meaning they were realizing the potential, was impeccable. And so they were capturing and maintaining that value, and they did not have interest in doing too much work with us at first because they're very cautious about something new or different. They wanted to limit the risk,
Sure.
and so I wanted to buy a certain amount the first year and then grow. And they said we'd like to do about, I think it was about a sixth of what I was asking. No, a third. And within about a month, they came back and they said, "Well, we're interested to revisit." Because I said, "Okay, whatever you feel comfortable with, let's work with that." I'm thinking long term. This is not about this
The
year. This is
transaction.
about
Yeah.
long
Right.
term. And so whatever the reasons are, it doesn't matter to me. Like this is a relationship. Let's learn and understand how we can support each other and be successful long term. And very quickly they came back and said, we want to do everything you were wanting to do originally. And we've been able to grow quite a bit from there to the point where I generally am very careful to not be a business partner that someone is fully dependent on if we can't deliver.
Hmm.
Um, and so especially early on, I experienced a lot of pain when others couldn't deliver, and there was a commitment, and they didn't follow through with it, either because they couldn't or they chose not to, and it really was in their best interest to choose not to in the short term, and it's a matter of just eating. Um, and I also was in a place where I I stretched a lot of relationships too, where they wanted to work with us and grow more than we were prepared to manage well.
Hmm.
Um, and so, those are mistakes and um,
Growing
learning
pains.
opportunities for us, pains that we've experienced and that we've caused that have led to really thinking long term. And so that's from a philosophical standpoint. Um, if something is a really good fit in the short term in terms of new producer relationships, um, that's not enough to move forward. We really require checking a lot of boxes on being a good long-term fit because it there's too much at stake, and we want to make a bigger investment. and we want it to be mutual, and we really want to support positive economic impact, which means working on the same page, going in the same direction. And it takes a longer term view that a lot of farmers already have. So usually I'm not trying to persuade people to think that way. I find myself doing it sometimes, but right fit is someone who's already thinking that way.
Well, and it's probably refreshing that somebody would come in, consistently having the same message that's a little different from maybe some of their past experience, in the on the transactional side of working with coffee and exporting it and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Ideally, um, not just in what we're doing, but I think in any business, a good metric of things being healthy and going in a positive direction is everyone in a supply chain in a place where they want to do business with each other again the next year.
mm,
That seems like it's a very low bar, but I think it's a pretty important one. Um, is everyone in a place where they're saying, we want to work with the same people we're working with the next year, and that interest doesn't decrease or even maintain, but it grows stronger.
that's great. I like that. That's a great philosophy, great business philosophy. I like that a lot. Well, let's shift into something a little bit more. I don't know, just a different part of the conversation. Y- when I was up there in Bellingham visiting your team, your office, there was a sign I think off to the side where I think at one point you were doing pour overs or something like that to get people to come and try your coffee. Um, I always
Yeah.
think, a lot of coffee folks have different opinions on the best way to taste coffee. I mean, how should we enjoy your coffee? I mean, what is the best way for somebody to experience, your family farm, the Tenango region? What's the best way to enjoy it, taste it, experience it, and what are we going to get when we do that?
I don't know if I shared or someone else might have shared that sign that you saw. We still have it. It's an A-frame sandwich board
That's right.
that's it's really nice. Like we had this laser cut steel and some cut into the wood, so it's causing shadowing where it says Onyx Coffee Bar. Um,
I think you had
if you
some porta filters from Old Espresso,
His
if I
handle.
remember correctly. Yeah, his
Yep.
handles. It was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually had the first um this is common in a lot of uh espresso machines used now in specialty coffee. But the concept of, and I haven't even heard this phrase for years, but PID, which stands for proportional integral derivative, I think. Essentially, it's this technology where if you want the water to come out at a certain temperature, that doesn't just mean you have the tank or boiler at that temperature, but you have a thermocouple that communicates back and will adjust based on what's coming out, what's in here, so that what comes out is what you want it to be. Ultimately, it's having control of the temperature, which is important. So ironically, we did not have espresso at Onyx Coffee Bar. We had a couple espresso machines and the first PID machine, which was a modified La Marzocco. Um, and if you search online, I did a TEDx talk talking a little bit about this space. But we only had black coffee. So as far as answering your question, my recommendation is, I mean, I tell people to take what they know and they're familiar with and to experiment from there and compare, because then you have a basis that's meaningful to you. Um, my opinion may not be what someone else likes, um, but I've got a lot of different answers. My favorite, I make a V60 every morning. Um, I used to import them from Japan, and I brew. This is from this morning.
There you go.
This is a 500 milliliter server, and that's actually not a Hario product, but I use a Hario V60. Um, and that's my preference, but in general, I like a clean filtered cup of coffee. Um, what I recommend to people, I think depends on what I think someone's realistically going to be successful at. Because there's a certain amount of fussiness that can be in making a cup of coffee, and it shouldn't be complicated. And I think the right amount of investment should be something that's not more than what you enjoy doing. Otherwise, you're not going to do a good job with it. Um, but a French press, um, I think, is the hardest one to mess up. And you can get a lot of complexity and body, a lot of the brightness, and a lot of oil and actual mouth feel. Um, I rarely do a French press, but I often recommend it to people, and then comparing from there. Um, I also I recommend um, tasting whatever you're most familiar with next to anything new that you try, not just brew method, but coffees. So if you try a new coffee, to compare it next to something that you're really familiar with. That way you have context. It's like if you try a new food of any kind, um, tasting it next to something you're really familiar with can give your palate a basis to have a strong
100%.
opinion. Yeah.
Well, you know,
Um,
we raise beef, cattle, and pork, right? And chicken. And once we kind of cross that line into, you know, pasture raised, and we kind of controlled their entire life, and they only had one bad day in their entire existence at the end, you know, it's hard to ever eat anything else. You know,
yeah.
once you taste, you know, the quality and you know it in your head, in your heart, wherever, you know, then you know what, you know, either other, in this case, other beef tastes like, or, you know, and when it comes to coffee, you know, and especially, you know, as a roaster, we have a couple of other origins represented in our roster. You know, you can pick up those subtleties really quick.
Mhm.
And I think the pour over is one of the fun ways to do it. I think it's straightforward, in the sense that you're not adding a lot of complexity to the process. You're really letting, you know, what the bean, how it was grown, how it was roasted, you know, shine. You're going to pick up what's there.
Yeah.
I really like that. I've gone more towards pour over as a taste test, even when I'm looking at things, even more so than a French press for exactly those reasons. But to your point, the French press can draw out a lot of the tasting notes and things like that for sure.
And
Um,
I'm not opposed to, and I very much enjoy just, with a coffee maker, an automatic.
Mr.
Um,
Coffee or whatever,
there's
yeah.
there's so many coffee makers, home makers now that I think do a great job that didn't exist 20 years ago.
Sure.
There's one brand, and this is I've been a big fan of them for a long time, but Technivorm is one that has not changed in how they've been manufactured in, I want to say, 30 to 40 years. Um, but 20 years ago in the United States, because of um, if you look at, there's commercial equipment and there's home equipment, and they each have different requirements and certifications
Right.
to be distributed and sold. And for home equipment, none of the coffee brewers that were made or distributed in North America would get hot enough. And it's a small detail, but it makes a difference. If the temperature is hot enough, you're able to extract enough.
Right.
And ultimately, all you're doing with coffee is you're not trying to get everything out. You want to get a certain amount out, not more, not less. If it's more, you get some unpleasant flavors. If it's less, you can actually get something that you might perceive to be sweeter, but it's not nearly as complex because you're missing out on some of the flavor that will be extracted at a little bit higher temperature. And so, yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. There's a lot of great home coffee makers that get hot enough now. And then it's just about the ratio. I think a fresh grind, that's key. Um, and then just playing with the ratios to get the right grind size and the amount of weight of coffee to
Sure.
water. Um, and it can be very, very, very simple to make a perfect cup of coffee.
But it could be sublime, that experience. It doesn't have to just be fuel. I mean,
Yeah.
there's, and then to me, there's nothing wrong with the something riding shotgun in your truck, down the highway just as pure fuel. But to have a otherworldly, not trying to get too poetic, but just a really neat experience every morning or whenever you drink coffee. I mean, it's attainable. The brewing methods are there, and again, sourcing high quality green coffee from family farms like yours. Hopefully, a roaster gets out of the way and just kind of can allow it to come alive through the roasting process, and then you can have a great experience at home. I think that's really the goal for all of us, roasters.
Yeah.
Um, on that same note, as a roaster, and again, we're a country, a farm roaster, right? We're trying to be the anti-urban.
Hmm.
There's a lot of folks in our area in the Puget Sound, that have gone deep on the urban, gritty, coffee experience, and we're trying to be the other one, something that's in your Yeti or whatever that you have on the side of your tractor as you're fixing the fence. I mean, that's just who we're trying to be.
Yeah.
But when we roast our coffee, your coffee in particular, I feel protective a little bit because I don't, I really don't want to screw it up. Um, I feel like,
Thank you for that.
well, yeah, I mean, and for all I know, I have. I mean, I want to honor the hard work that you and your family and the associations and the different groups that you're working with, and Way Tenango in particular. I want it to be as positive of a light shine, shone, whatever, on what you guys are doing. So, with that in mind, how can we roasters really better support you, your coffee, and these family farms? What can we do better? Because I know that there's history in irresponsible buying, and you kind of touched on it earlier,
Hmm.
or kind of bully tactics, or whatever the thing has happened. How
Yeah.
can we, as the roaster, who it ends up in our on our pallet in our place, how can we do a better job? What would you ask of us?
Oh, I'm excited about this question. Um, so I'm going to take a step back and say over the last 20 years, there are different things and models that have, I think, had a positive impact in terms of shining a light on recognizing and identifying quality. And I'll just share really quickly two extremes that are very different, but both impactful. One is we've participated in one way or another for the last 20 years since its inception in the Cup of Excellence. And this is an auction that's online and it's in a handful of countries. It's kind of grown and shrunk over the years, but in each country, each year that it participates in, it started in Brazil, um, and was started actually largely by a guy named George Howell in Boston. He has a company named George Howell Coffee, and he had a chain called Coffee, the coffee. I think it was the Coffee Connection. Um, and he sold it to Starbucks. They made an offer and he turned it down. That happened several times. But in short, Starbucks didn't want to go to the East Coast if they couldn't come in and lead with quality. And they had to do an equal or better job than he was doing to send that message, especially if they were going to start in Boston. And they figured the best way to do that is just to buy him out. Um, long story short, that he ended up selling and signed a non-compete. And part of what he did in consulting was he ended up partnering with a group in Brazil to market Brazilian coffees to start this auction. Um, and the second country that they went to was Guatemala. So I've had a pretty good snapshot for over 2 decades on this, I think, amazing investment of that's an incredible amount of work. And frankly, it's horribly inefficient. But what it does is it showcases the very best coffee produced in the entire country each year until it narrows down on all these offers. There's a national jury that narrows it down, and then you've got an international jury, and a lot of times they end up being the same buyers online. But these are the best coffees in the country each year. And so you get a chance to celebrate. And in the last 5 to 10 years, the size of these lots and the price per pound have inversely gone to extremes. The price has gone up and up, and the size has gone down. Um, and so, like any competition, you look at the Olympics, a new event, the difference between first and last is this range. And then over the course of a few decades, all of a sudden, this big gap is just a fraction of a second and that's kind of what's happened with this cup of excellence. It shines the light on really the tip of the spear, or if you have a quality triangle, the very top fraction of 1%. Separately, there have been various efforts, and one of them, there used to be a program called that was tied with Q graders. So my wife and I were some of the first Q graders in the world. Now there's maybe 7 to 10,000 of them, and this is like a sommelier but in coffee. And and when that program started, there was also a Q uh, auction that was short-lived for a few years. And the aim there was not to recognize the highest quality, but to accurately score good quality. Now, I contrast these because I don't think one is better than the other. What happens in specialty coffee is I think roasters will often want to showcase these stars, and that's great, but that's not sustainable. It's exciting, but that's a very small percentage of production. And for most farmers, the cost for them to produce that is higher than they realize. They're babying a small part of the farm to be amazing, and they might have 3 to 5 times the cost on that part, and they may sell it for double or triple something else. And so it feels like it's a net gain, but they're actually going backwards financially. It's positive because they're getting more exposure and awareness. It opens doors. And ultimately, what makes the business better is is producing a good quality with the mass. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, um, that's I think what's most important, just to be at a very simple level, to be doing a good job with the basics and to be consistent. Um, and so um, I think for a roaster to do a good job with the basics and to showcase that well um, goes a long way. And it's easy to get distracted with some shiny things, and I'm guilty of it, very guilty of it. Um, but you got to have the basics down, and part of the basics is being consistent. Um, and in Guatemala, most coffees are washed. And what makes I think coffees from Guatemala and Huehue in particular unique is the elevation. They're slow grown, so there's more sweetness and acidity, and and so I mean, I think you said it really well to not mess it up. I think ultimately that's a good goal for anyone after the farmer, between the farmer and the cup. I think number one goal is to not mess things up. Um, I think if that's the focus, the outcome is better in terms of being able to have a positive impact to producers. Um, because there's a lot of people that, including myself and people that I work with, that will get excited. Green coffee buyers sometimes are the worst at every point in the chain. The worst because they care about what they're doing and they're passionate and they're buying with their heart and their palate. And sometimes what they like the most is not really what they or most people would like and enjoy drinking every day. It's something that you think, this is amazing, but I'm not going to have a pot of this ever. It's a really unique outside of the box and it's interesting. Um, and so ultimately, it's just saying these aren't bad things, but to really focus what's the base and just doing that really well. I think probably like in any supply chain, it honors the work that goes into producing it and provides clarity and a lens for consumers to really appreciate the sweat that goes in at the ground level um, on a more personal level.
Oh, that's a great answer. I love it. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of ways that we can, you know, take a really great raw product or and either make it, coax out everything it was meant to be, right?
Mm.
Or we could, literally kill it to death or cook it to death, depending on what we're what we're talking about. Well, that's a great answer, and to be sensitive to time and getting back to what we're doing. Um, I mean, I feel like we could go deeper on all kinds of things, and I do want to talk about honey. I was actually thinking about, if you're interested down the line, is doing a whole conversation around the honey, because I think it's one of the most unique things about what you're doing there is these. And I get too excited and I would nerd out about it. So I do kind of want to put a pin in that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But Edwin, where can coffee roasters and everyday coffee drinkers find out more information about you and your business and what you guys are doing in Guatemala and in Bellingham with Onyx Coffee?
I would say just probably going to the onyxcoffee.com website. We also have Instagram. Um, People can sign up for a newsletter too, which I
It's a
think you
really good
probably
newsletter. Yeah.
we do try and be very intentional to not put out a lot of information that would kind of end up being noise, but to be pretty limited and deep, um, so that there's fewer communications. And when we do, it's also we try and set it up so that if someone wants to just skim, that you can get the headlines, and if you want to go deeper, you can. Yeah, onyxcoffee.com and
Love it.
Onyx Instagram.
Love it. Edwin, well, thank you very much for taking time to chat with us. I mean, to me, the ultimate, farm to farm experience, right? We're from Guatemala to Bellingham to Carnation, Washington, and our little farm.
Yeah,
It doesn't get much more of a farm table conversation than that, I don't think.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you much for this time and opportunity, Michael. I appreciate it.
Love it. Well, we'll talk to you real soon.
Okay, all right.
Take care. Bye.
You too. Bye.